So welcome everyone. I'm Emily Zilber. I'm the Director of Curatorial Affairs and Strategic Partnerships here at the Rhode and Esherick Museum. I'm so excited for you to join us today for our Spotlight Talk with Suzi Fox. Suzi won second place prize in Telling Tales, the museum's 29th Annual Juried Exhibition. So we've got a short 15 to 20 minute talk today with about 5 minutes for questions at the end. So save those up if you have any for Suzi. Before we get started with today's program, I just want to remind you that on August 22nd, our little back to school talk with Telling Tales artist John R.G. Roth will happen at noon. This is a free talk, and RSVPs for this event can be found on our website. Today is the second Spotlight talk that we have digging into the work featured in Telling Tales, and I'm showing here the cover and spread from the publication that goes along with this exhibition, which is both in our visitor center at WEM and also available online for you to spend some time with. This celebrates the importance of storytelling in Esherick's life and career. It features 25 artists whose work in wood is a testament to the power of a well-told story. So you can find the first talk that we had with Lucia Garzon on our website or YouTube page, and hopefully you'll join us for the third talk as well. So today, we're so thrilled to have Suzi Fox with us to talk more about the works in the show, and to share more with us about her creative practice. I'm going to bring up one of Suzi's works that's in the exhibition while I give a quick introduction to Suzi. Suzi Fox is a sculptor based in Virginia. Her work examines the actions of making and her ideas of identity expanded through tools and the objects that they create. So she transforms pre-existing objects into sculptures that allude to navigating interpersonal encounters or mine her life's cross-cultural experiences. Fox received an MFA from the Rhode Island School of Design and a BFA from Virginia Commonwealth University, both in sculpture, and she currently works at American University in Washington, D.C., in addition to her studio practice. So we're going to have some time for conversation with Suzi. I'll ask everyone, if they haven't already done so, to put themselves on mute. My colleague Larissa is here standing by, and she will answer any questions you put in the chat that are not directly for the artist, and we'll pick those up at the end. You're welcome after our conversation today to unmute and ask Suzi any questions. We'd love to hear from you once we get to that point. So without further ado, I've talked enough. Let's bring in Suzi. I'm so happy that you're here with us. Thank you for joining us in WEM's virtual space today.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to talk first about the exhibition, the pieces that are in the exhibition. If we can start off with this piece, How to Make Friends and Influence People, which is a book that I titled from a book that I know many folks are very familiar with. Can you give me an overview of this piece and the other piece in the exhibition, which I'll pull up on the slide here, Gentle Persuaders, and tell me a little bit more about your thinking in making them?
It's interesting with this piece, How to Win Friends and Influence People. I actually started with the objects first, and then ended with the title for the sculpture. So the piece really relates to my personal experience and observations of how people interact with one another. So I'm always thinking about what their intentions are and what kind of relationship will be developed. So the piece has, it suggests, there's balance and there's tension, and I think that, the clamp I carved into fingers that hold this utility knife, and on the utility knife, you're able to see, or on the utility blade, you're able to see that gesture or that handshake. So, I like the piece that it's minimal and quick to read, and that, once the viewer is able to connect with the title, that it has that element of humor and irony. I personally have not read the Carnegie book, but I thought it was really fascinating that that this self-help book has these interesting segments on one being that's titled Be a Leader, How to Change People Without Giving Offense or Arousing Resentment, 12 ways to win people over to your way of thinking. So I thought that, it was a really good title for the piece, and
Mm,
I really enjoy the way that, if you were to tighten the clamp, that the blade, it's just balanced in there, that it's able, if you were to tighten it down, that it would cut through the wood itself. So I think that, as I said, for me it was really about that, how people interact with one another, or that
well,
meeting.
yeah, and I love this piece too for its kind of subversion of use that you alluded to, right? If we try to use this as a clamp, we're we're destroying the piece itself, which is quite a metaphor for what it means for people to be in kind of these transactional relationships with one another.
Absolutely. I think, for me, I like things to be easy or clear for the viewer to read, but, the process is not, that
Mm,
I had to, the tools that I used to actually carve the Jurgensen clamp, which were very basic and ironically enough was a utility knife and some files, and the blade I had
hmm,
to, um, rust and then scratch away that rust to be able to create that handshake. And then I had to polyacrylic over that to make sure that it sealed it and that it didn't continue to rust away the handshake. So
mm.
those elements of problem solving, or those elements, I find really interesting for me, but I do like when the viewer is able to see it, that it's clear and that they are able to understand the pieces.
Mm. Can you tell us a little bit about Gentle Persuaders?
Really, it came from an assortment of hammers that were about to be discarded, and I really loved that the history of use was visible on each hammer. And it felt very natural for me to sort of connect myself with the tool and carve fingers into the bottom of the hammer. I think there's always, a push pull. And sometimes when you're using the tool, you just want everything to sort of conform. So I thought that it was, the expression "a gentle persuader" was a perfect title for the piece. And what I discovered with this is that, that since the handles are made of different types of wood, that I had to approach it in different ways of carving
Mm,
it in different ways. So I think of that, there's, with both of these pieces, that element of humor and, that, and connects to the body. I also thought about, that gesture of, with a finger you're poking. So if you poke someone enough, you can get them to do what you want, or that, action of the fist, you're able to pound in, exert your force. So I think
mm.
those layers and connections, sort of resonated with me with the piece. But once again, I think that the viewer is able to understand it, and understand the narrative.
Well,
So
I
I
think that's, yeah, I mean, I think that's part of what's so interesting, right? So this is a show that's focused on stories and storytelling. And here we're not looking at a specific story that's being told, but you've made pieces that really take on this bigger question about narratives about relationships and people and how they engage with one another, and the way that you sort of engage with stories about tools and work, and as a stand-in for sort of humans. So I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about that role of storytelling, that role of narrative in the work that you do.
verbally, I'm terrible at storytelling, but visually, I can tell a story clearly, showing all the nuances and details captured through materials and process. I love that process has many layers you can bring forward in a piece, or in a sculpture. I mean, I think, a lot of resources for my stories come from misunderstanding of situations or common
Mm,
expressions that people use. And so a lot of my time, I spend, trying to understand a situation or the meaning of something. But, ultimately, what I realized is that those misunderstandings make interesting stories. I like the idea that a craftsman creates objects for the sake of the object itself and its usefulness for someone, and an artist creates the sake for self-expression or connection to tell a story. So I
Mm,
think I like that, sort of combination. You know, I have a great appreciation for, masters of their craft, um, and the tools that they use. I just approach it in a different way to create a piece or tell a story. If
mm,
someone were to take a look at the way that I work, I use whatever I have on hand, and if I don't have that, I create the tool to make the work.
mm. So
So,
did you have to create tools for creating any of these pieces?
not for these, but I actually that's not true. I For etching the handshake onto the utility knife, I needed to find something that was going to be thin enough or delicate enough. And what I did was I took a disposable mechanical pencil and I took the lead out of the mechanical pencil and inserted a regular household needle and put it back together,
Hmm.
and used that to sort of scratch the surface of the utility blade. So it's just a matter of, I couldn't find, and I'm sure there was a tool out there that they have specifically for that material. But for me, problem solving and using, as I said, using what I had on hand made sense
Mm.
for my approach of working.
So let's walk it back a little bit, because I'd love to hear, you we've got some sort of interesting thoughts about your approach and your work as an artist, and I'm curious if you can tell us a little bit about your path and how you sort of started to do this work.
I think originally, I'm at the very start, I'm a military kid. I'm a military kid, so I was always moving around, and so to occupy my time, art was a great way to occupy my time, and the isolation from each move. So that's like the very, very
Mm,
beginning. But I ended up really starting out. When I applied to go to art school, I started out as an illustration and textiles major, and then
mm,
then I switched majors to sculpture. And the reason why I did that is because for me, the discipline of sculpture cast the widest net, that I was able to use. I could take what I needed. I can pick and choose what I wanted to learn and how I wanted to express myself under the net of sculpture. So
mm.
that's really, for me, how I started, and ended up in sculpture. And now, I have the practice of making, and I also have the practice of teaching.
Mhm.
So that's a little bit about my journey on becoming an artist.
Well, I love that big, broad umbrella of sculpture and what that allows you to do, and kind of how that brings us back to thinking about Esherick, for whom everything was a sculpture in some way, shape, or form. You had the chance to come and see the studio, I think for the first time, for the opening for this exhibition. And I'd love to hear, a little bit about your experience coming here, spending time with it, and what you thought about being in Esherick's space and how it might relate back to your own work.
Well, for me, what I discovered, like so many other artists, were the similarities with Esherick, specifically how he approaches work and materials, applying the principles of sculpture to common utilitarian objects. There's no detail too small, and his resourcefulness and problem solving. When I saw the space, that in person, like I said, I, like so many other people, was amazed at, you know, uh, how many things there were to look at, and how clever he was, or how as I said, resourceful he was with the material, or using wood and the materials he had around him, or how he filled his space. And
Mm,
I think that there was always something to look at for me, and it was one of those experiences that I would like to have again, and just really be able to spend time, because I feel as though I missed a lot of information. there were so many things that I was trying to process, and I really feel like I didn't get the full, I just couldn't get everything in.
Which
It was stimulation overload.
which I think is hard for people who spend every day of their lives going back to that space, as I know some folks on the call can attest to. I'm curious if there was a space in the studio that resonated with you the most.
I don't think there was one space, because I think there were so many that, it as I said, there was, you know just just the smallest details, from, the I think the cover of the vent covers, the flooring itself, just the kitchen, from the kitchen to the bathrooms to the stairs, that there was not one specific thing. There were a series of things that just sort of captured my attention, and I think that, like I said, I think that I really would love to just see that space again, and just sort of be able to, um, I think, understand more fully, because I don't think you get,
Yeah.
there's the first impression, and then there is, seeing something again, or, meeting somebody again, that you get a better understanding of what is around you or what you're seeing.
Well, you certainly have an open invitation, and you're part of the museum's community now. So anytime. I'm curious if you can share a little bit about what you're working on right now and what you're most excited about in your work right now.
I think for me, it's really just getting back to making artwork that I think is interesting, and without getting caught up on a specific timeline or a career path that I thought I needed to follow. I think material wise, what I'm excited about is revisiting, as I said, I started as a with a textiles background, and I'm revisiting weaving, but this time I'm applying it to worn out sanding belt from a belt sander. So I'm taking that used belt, that has that history of wear, and just turning it into strips, and then weaving it into different forms. I'm not sure what those forms will be, or what type of conversation I want to have, but I'm also excited that, those, when I talk about that history of use, those belts come from from students who used that tool in the wood shop that I teach at. So you're seeing that visibility. For me, I'm able to see, how worn out it is, how worn down it became from, someone trying to create that project. So I think that is really exciting, and I worked with sandpaper before, and taking different grits and folding those grits into, geometric forms. But this time I'm taking that technique of weaving, and taking, something that has already has that wear and use in it, and trying to show that and strip it down.
So
So
we get this kind of collapsing of past and present in something that you're creating that's entirely new.
Correct. So I think, it's so those, it's very simple, but that's, I would say that, I'm, really just, as I said, excited about focusing on not the trajectory, but, the journey, not the end goal, but the journey, as cliche as that sounds.
Cliche, but cliches are cliches for a reason, right? The journey is important, and to that end, I'd love to open it up to anyone who is with us in the audience today who might have a question for Suzi about the journey, or anything else. Feel free to, we're a small group, so feel free to unmute yourself and just ask the question if you have one, and if not, I have more questions for Suzi.
And I promise I'll try to do my best answering your question. If you have a question to its fullest.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Cool. Hi, Suzi. Great work. I love this stuff. I just wondered about, you've mentioned teaching, and like how teaching fits into your practice and life. What kind of teaching you're doing?
I teach, I've taught a lot of courses, and I've been teaching for 22 years. And I think that, the way that it fits in is that I'm always amazed at how people think in the way that students problem solve. Students are really smart, and, the solutions that they come up with. And I think that, that introducing a theme or a problem and the way that they approach it always inspires me, or really keeps me interested in the practice. And I think that filters into my work. But there is something really fascinating about when somebody, a student, teaches me something that I didn't even think that you were able to do. And I think one example is, and I talk about this in my class a lot, is I have a wire project, and a student asked me many years ago, and they weren't even an art major. They said, okay, can I take this wire and straighten it in a drill? And I said, and I thought about it, and I was like, I don't think you can, but I said, go ahead and try it. And what they did is they clamped down one end, stuck the other end in the drill, gently pulled back. And what it did was it straightened that wire perfect. It gave you this perfect piece of wire to work with and form into, a three-dimensional contour wire shoe or whatever. So, that's just one example of, how that I learned something that I didn't know before.
Hmm.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I'm just always curious. I'm a teacher as well, and I just wonder how it does something very similar for me. Kind of informs my problem solving abilities in my own work.
And I love that. For me is, I can't say it enough. Problem solving is, something that is always interests me.
Hmm.
Thanks.
We have time for one more question, and because I have the screen share, Larissa, I can't see the chat. So if there's anything in there, let me know. If not,
nothing in the chat yet.
Well, I'd love to ask Suzi to talk about the other piece that you shared images of with me, if that is okay, as a way to end our conversation.
That sounds perfect.
Okay.
With this piece, what I did is I took a putty knife, and I cut out my profile. And for me, this is a self-portrait. And what I did with that tool is I actually took the tool and I used it to screed plaster to create molding. And what I did was I took that molding and I installed it in a space. So I became a part of the architecture where I'm not visible. It's just a way of being a part of that space without physically being there, and sort of taking that tool and using it to create that self-portrait, and I think that process of screeding was really interesting, or working with the plaster material. So I think that, I was trying to find a way that I could sort of put my, instead of just putting the work in there, try to find a way to sort of integrate myself into the architecture itself, or the gallery space itself. So I think that, and I think that fits with the body, the other two pieces that I showed at the Esherick Museum. And, I think there's a simplicity to it, and sort of how I see myself as a maker, or how I want to use these objects. So, so I think that is a sort of different approach, where I'm not working with wood, but I think it's just another example of my work itself.
But certainly a really interesting approach to problem solving, which I think runs throughout, and is certainly ties you back to one of the many things that ties you to Esherick and Esherick's legacy. I want to thank you so much for being here with us today, Suzi, for taking the time to share your artwork and your story. If folks, you know, as we're leaving the chat today and heading back into our days, want to unmute themselves and just, you know, say a quick goodbye, we'd love to have you do that. And we hope that we'll see you back here in about a month for our artist talk with John R.G. Roth. Thank you, everyone, for spending time with us today.
Thank you. And thank you for having me.
Well done. Very interesting.